And we'll start with this note from Justin. And this is a little bit of a longer note, so just hang with me. Justin says, Ben, perhaps on the next Sharp Tech, it would be interesting to discuss the value of Elon companies commercializing technology quickly. For example, not only is Tesla betting that more data will lead to level 5 autonomy, but their customers are paying them for the privilege of providing that data. Most do so passively, simply by purchasing a Tesla, which then runs the full self-driving models in shadow mode, meaning that Tesla can see where the human makes a driving choice that is different from the self-driving model, and the AI developers can respond accordingly. A minority of these customers also provide data by actively using full self-driving, having either purchased it or via the monthly subscription. As a result, I would argue that there is another way to think about whether Tesla or Waymo is ahead. On the metrics you listed, sure, Waymo appears to be ahead. However, in terms of overall value created, I would argue that Tesla is far ahead. And then in his email, Justin runs some numbers to estimate that Tesla is currently getting data on roughly 500 million self-driven miles per year, while Waymo is getting data on 26 million miles per year. So your mileage may vary, pardon the pun.
No pun intended. Yeah, that was a good one. Well done.
Those calculations. But he continues and says, as one additional data point, I would say the Tesla miles are more useful. I use full self-driving for everything from my 15-minute drive to work to my 3-hour drives out to the end of Long Island through horrific traffic. It's not perfect, and I intervene periodically, but it has changed the way I drive such that on the rare occasion when I'm forced to go back to driving a car without full self-driving, it feels archaic and genuinely painful. I readily admit to being an early adopter of technology, willing to suffer the flaws of bleeding-edge tools before they are accepted by the masses. But full self-driving also passes the spouse test. My wife adopts technology on a more typical timeline and very much did not enjoy riding in or using full self-driving in its earlier iterations. But she recently admitted she also truly missed it when it was taken away on a recent drive because of her failure to pay attention to the road.
Is that a gentle letting down of the spouse, or was that a little harsh?
Well, no, I mean, I think that's fair, and I think
she self-admitted, right? Yes.
Well, honestly, I included this because I relate more to the spouse, and it's eye-opening that it has also become addictive to her. But he finishes and says, "What do you think? This was way too long, but hopefully I provided some food for thought here." So what do you think, Ben? Does that spark any thoughts for you?
For sure. I would say number one, seeing the most recent full self-driving, and again, don't want to over-index on just a few rides. But when I last bought a car in the US that I use mostly in the summers, I just wanted something that was, convenient. I needed to get it quickly. But one of my core requirements was it had to have adaptive cruise control, because I've rented enough cars and used that enough, and you're doing long highway driving, that to me, it is just painful to drive a car that does not have adaptive cruise control. And I think I would probably completely relate to the full self-driving. Now I'm just pretty irritated I didn't get a Tesla, even though I was on this podcast previously saying, look, I live in the Midwest. I take really long drives. Now I'm all talk, because now I was just thinking about the 12-hour drive I took to Canada last year. Totally normal, because I'm Midwesterner at heart. That would suck in it. Yeah. I mean, we spent less time on filling up with gas to go there and back than one charging session for a Tesla. So I mean, there's that sort of that bit still holds. But yeah, it's nice. I like driving, but there's a lot of driving that is not enjoyable driving, and it would definitely be sort of nice to have. So I think when Justin says that, once you get used to it, it's really hard to give it up. Mm-hmm. I think that's probably true. And as a sort of side note, maybe this gets into I think one of the more interesting things Tesla did over the last couple of years was they've opened up their charging network. And so other companies now will pay them and they will basically accumulate licensing fees. So that's really attractive, right? They have this additional revenue stream going on. It's going to be the standard the standard is going to be open, but they have the most infrastructure as far as the stations out there. And so that's going to be an additional revenue stream. But at the same time, it's like, well, that was a huge reason to get a Tesla, is because, you have access to their supercharger network. And now if that goes away, why not just buy something else? And I think that's probably evidence of the high degree of confidence they had about self-driving, that, look, no one's going to go anywhere because they want sort of our self-driving technology.
Yeah.
Now,
well, and just on the self-driving point and the note about his wife, it reminds me of having cameras and sensors in the car to help with parking. And we talked a little bit about, back when we were talking about Boeing and Airbus and the different approaches to autopilot software, and how certain pilots just become more reliant on the software and never learn how to fly manually. And over time, that's how I've become with parking. And just, it's so much more annoying to get into a car that doesn't have the cameras showing you as you back up and the sensors. If I don't have, and look, I consider myself a great parallel parker, but if I don't have that technology, it's just really, really annoying. And hearing about Justin's wife made me realize eventually that's going to be true for all of us. With
you might have some self introspection coming up. I'm ready to come over and I'm going to paint over your camera, see how well you parallel park then.
Well, look, I'm still good at it, but I don't like it. And all I'm saying is I now recognize that eventually I'm going to feel that way about driving more generally. Maybe 10, 15 years from now, that'll be my experience as a driver.
Yeah, for sure. Now, to be clear, when I was in Teslas with that experience, it had to be, there was at least 2 times that I can recall where the driver had to take over. And so it's not even remotely close to being ready. To be clear, it's not, what is in the field right now is not competitive with Waymo. Then again, the Waymos are geographically constrained, and that is part of the level 4 designation. Is it's fully operational. And by the way, I did misstate about Waymo remote drivers taking over. It's funny that I kind of, when I was going through and typing out the levels, I realized, wait, there's kind of a disconnect here, because level 4 means it can always operate on its own. That is actually correct. Waymo sort of reached out, is like, well, just to be clear, the Waymo can request assistance, but it has to always be able to operate on its own. And sometimes, though, that means it just stops, right? I think that's probably why it's not taking passengers on freeways yet. It is in testing on freeways, I think primarily in Phoenix. But what do you do in a weird situation? Like when you're going, 80 miles per hour or 75 or whatever it might be, that is definitely a bit hairier. But, from what's out there, it is sort of better. But there was a couple things, and I appreciate your admitting this is sort of a synthesis of stuff we've talked about. So apologies if I'm sort of repeating myself. But I think there's 2 points that I did want to sort of distill sort of in this article.
Yep.
Number one is, it's just a fundamentally different goal to be talking about true autonomy versus self-driving cars. And actually, now that I realize, in my article, I almost should have made that even clearer. Waymo is working towards self-driving cars. Tesla, at least according to their presentation, which is funny because everyone was mad about the presentation and its lack of specifics, but in many respects, I felt like the presentation actually said more if you sort of knew what to look for. And one of these was, it was almost like a retreat from past presentations. They have gotten a ton into specifics, but now there's a bit like, wait, it's not that we're down the wrong path, but this isn't the path. Where are we actually trying to go? And that goal is true autonomy. And true autonomy means everyone is, like, self-driving cars is just part of the infrastructure that we have. And I think this solves a lot of sort of things. We were in a group chat and talking about, like, well, how is a Tesla going to get to, like, when it breaks down, and how's it going to pull into a repair shop and all these sorts of things when there's no wheels or drivers? And well, the answer is, if everything is like this, infrastructure is going to spring up to support it, right? It's going, like, this fundamental change will change the environment around it to accommodate it. And this is incredibly audacious, right? It's like, I was writing about, here's an analogy. I was writing about Intel and AMD this week, right? They're having a partnership. It's like, it's kind of an obvious thing to do, because they need to evolve the x86 sort of ISA. They're they're jointly threatened by ARM, and then AI is obviously sort of looming over everything. So of course they're partnering together. But anyone who's been in tech for a long time, the idea of Intel, AMD even agreeing on a meeting time is like incredible, right? These are arguably the most bitter rivals in the history of tech. Like Microsoft versus Apple is nothing compared to Intel versus AMD. And like they were in court for basically 20 years straight. And lots of dirty tactics, lots of dirty tricks, mostly by Intel towards AMD, to be totally honest. But Intel would say, look, we invented all this stuff. They keep trying to copy us. Like of course we're doing dirty tricks, right? But they're sort of partnering together. And the reason is, for a very long time, and Intel realized this back with the 486, where there was a big push then to shift to a different set of construction sets were called RISC versus CISC. RISC is sort of theoretically more efficient, all these sorts of things. And there was a split within Intel, which way to go. Pat Gelsinger, the current CEO, was actually on the side of, no, we should keep with x86 because it doesn't matter if it's somewhat less efficient. The software advantage is massive. For to start out afresh, even if someone comes along with a different instruction set that is better, they have to rebuild all the software. By the time they get all the software built, our manufacturing is going to be leaping ahead, and our speed advantage for our manufacturing will overwhelm any sort of like marginal advantages they have in their sort of architecture. And that was the right call. And then Intel, funnily enough, made a mistake. They forgot that lesson. So you fast forward when 64-bit computing is coming along, and Intel's like, okay, here's a chance to start afresh. We're going to make a new ISA, a new kind of chip around 64-bit. And by the way, AMD is not going to be able to copy us now. They don't have any licenses. They don't have all this sort of stuff that is downstream from IBM forcing Intel to second source or have a second source for chips. So they had to share everything with AMD way back in the 80s. That's the genesis of all of this. And so Intel's like, oh, this is our chance to start afresh. AMD comes along. So Intel has this big thing to build this new sort of instruction sets. And they and HP were sort of the main two entities working on it, but there was other folks involved. The company that was not involved was AMD. And like it was very clear what was happening. Intel was going to shut AMD out once and for all. So AMD comes out with their own sort of extension, which is, we have a 64-bit instruction set, which, by the way, has a compatibility mode, which means it's backwards compatible with 32-bit. And everyone's like, yes, that's better. Like, we don't want to rewrite all the software in the world just so it works on your chip. It's better if we can just use what we already have and transition into this new world. And it's funny, that was actually the key transformation of that relationship, because Intel suddenly had to license that from AMD because AMD was right. And that is what the industry adopted. And now they had the grounds for a cross-licensing agreement where they both needed each other.
Had a little bit more leverage,
That's right. AMD needed x86 and Intel needed the 64-bit sort of extension that AMD created. And so,
but talk more about the distinction between self-driving and autonomy.
No, I'm doing the weave, as it's known. Yes. Okay, so what happened though? And so that was like, in both cases, the right decision was to optimize for backwards compatibility because the gains from a clean break just weren't worth it. Then the iPhone comes along. The key thing about the iPhone relative to Windows Phone was trying to be an extension of your computer. It literally had a start button on it, right? It was like little X's in the corner to sort of close apps. Microsoft was like sort of porting the desktop onto the phone. And you can understand why they did that. That's what big companies do. We have all these sort of advantages. We're going to put them into place. And Apple's like, no, it's a new device. It's a new interface, direct manipulation. We have to start from scratch. And yes, we're going to take the kernel, like the core operating system from Mac OS. That's the core of sort of iOS. But everything above that has to be fresh. Oh, and by the way, this is going to be completely powered by batteries. So the number one most important thing is not outright performance, it's efficiency. And so we're going to use ARM. This is a more efficient chip and it has a better roadmap in terms of efficiency. We're going to go in that direction. And the key thing there is that started a cycle of building all sorts of software and getting that was already on x86, and now it had to all work on ARM. ARM at that point was mostly powering, it did power some phones, but it powered a bunch of like just non-important devices. That was the key thing that elevated ARM to, in the long run, being a competitor for Intel and being a competitor for AMD. And because it kickstarted this 15-year period of rebuilding all this low-level software. All the work that Pat Gelsinger in his first stint at Intel said no one has time to do that, because why would they? The gains aren't worth it. Well, if your most important thing is efficiency, then the gains were worth it. It was worth it to do all the work. And when all the work sort of happened, suddenly ARM is now competitive with computers. And now it's competitive with servers. And suddenly Intel and AMD have to become friends because they are threatened by ARM because of this sort of clean break. Clean breaks happen when the benefits are so overwhelming that infrastructure builds up around it to support the new paradigm.
Right.
Now, to tie this back to Tesla, what Tesla is proposing, and just to be clear, this article was laying out how I think Elon Musk and Tesla are thinking about it. It was not, I don't know enough to say whether it's going to work or not.
Right.
But what I think they were proposing, and why Musk spent this presentation mostly talking about this future autonomous world, and didn't spend and rented out the whole Warner Brothers sort of studio lot to sort of build a demonstration of this, and didn't talk about business model or all this sort of stuff, is basically he's saying, look, building something that works in the current built environment is a waste of time and ultimately a dead end. Sure, it'd be nice, like a better Uber, but what would it mean to completely transform everything? And what he's proposing is autonomy presents the opportunity for a smartphone-like moment where the benefits are so overwhelming that it's actually will in the long run be worth rebuilding the built infrastructure to support this new vision. And that's the goal. That's the goal.